In this video, we'll talk about macro recorder in Google Sheets. So if you go under Tools, you're gonna find this new section, Macros, and Record Macro. So macro recorder is basically something that will repeat the steps that you do. If I record a macro, so I'm gonna do it here. So I'll do Tools, Macro, Record Macro. So now it's basically recording whatever I'm doing on a screen. And there are two ways of recording. There is the absolute reference and there is the relative reference. So I'm going to start with absolute reference for you to see what's going to happen. Macro recorder is basically now looking at what I'm doing and it's going to record all the steps so it can actually repeat them. Now when you record this, the pace you record it at doesn't matter. So whether you do this slow or fast, the result is going to be the same. So it's best to take your time and make sure you do it right, rather than try to do it fast and fail at it and then try to record it all over again. So I'm going to do some basic steps here. I'll go ahead and change some formattings, add a formula, and add a column, things like that. So in here, I'm going to add a new column, call it location. And then I'll go ahead and format it the same as this. Then I'll go ahead and create a formula. So I'm going to join city and state together with a comma, quote, comma space quote. So function, and I'm going to drag it down. Maybe auto fit the column. And then I'll go to this sales column and change the number formatting. Maybe we'll decrease some decimal points, make them whole numbers, and maybe add another calculation. Make the formatting the same. I'm gonna say equal sales minus cost of goods. Send it down. So there we have it. I just recorded all those steps. So once you're done, you just hit save. And then you have to give a name for this macro. Boring steps. So it's a very good way if you're doing something repeatedly every single month and it's the same thing. Maybe create a macro that will just pretty much repeat those steps. So now that macro is going to be under tools, macros, and see there is that boring steps. So if I undo some of the steps, I believe this is where I started. So I'll go under tools, macros, and boring steps. It's not perfect. It didn't record me dragging this down, apparently. So it's pretty new. Hopefully those are some things that will be fixed. But you can see how it actually did some of the steps. Maybe do some additional steps so it actually saves that last step. And it also skipped some of them. So for example, when I was auto-fitting this, it didn't record that. Let's actually go take a look at the piece of code that it produces as a result. So I'm going to go under Tools, Script Editor. There it is, macros. So that's our boring steps macro. And you can see how we recorded this step-by-step instructions. If you watched any of my app scripts previous videos, some of these things should be pretty familiar to you. So you can see how we go to the spreadsheet app class and we get basically the active spreadsheet. And then we go get the range, and it basically does a lot of extra steps that are really not necessary. So for example, instead of just typing the value in I1 cell, it will first go and activate it. Then it will set that cell value to location. And then it goes to the next step, and so on. So if you're just starting out, this shouldn't concern you all that much. Just record it, replay the macro, let it do whatever it needs to do. one thing I want to show you, I'm gonna close this. So now I want to show you the difference between the type of macro you record. So for example, if I'm right here in this I2 cell, and I go under tools and do macros and record a macro, and right now I'm in use absolute references mode. So if I go here and type equals this minus this, hit enter, that gives me that total number. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this macro, that just a single step, so you can see what's gonna happen. Net calculation, something. So if I go ahead and delete this, and I'm here and I run that macro, it's gonna do what I did, right? Now let me go over here and run that macro again. And you can see it does exactly the same thing. So this is the result of using absolute references when recording. It doesn't matter where I am, the result of the macro is gonna be exactly the same. Now, let's try to record the same thing in relative mode. So I'm gonna do use relative reference, and I'll do sales, equals sales minus cost of goods, and hit enter. So that's it, save. Relative reference. So now if I delete this, I go here, I'm gonna click in that cell, macros, relative reference. Same thing, right? Now I'm gonna go to this cell. I'm gonna go tools, macros, relative reference. And see what it does now, it's doing this too. Because relative reference works relative to the cell that you started. So if I started recording in this cell, I took this minus this, it's gonna do relative to this cell. It was like this cell, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4 cells to the left, this cells, and 3 cells to the left was this cell. So it's gonna do that calculation. And when you do it here and you run the macro, now it's looking at this two. So this many steps to the left, this many steps to the left, this other cell. Which means if I'm over here and I try to just run the same thing, see, I'm getting an error because now I'm relative to this. It's this many cells left, this many cells right. And that's your relative cell reference. Now, if you're someone who already knows some AppScript coding, Macro Recorder could be great to just get some pieces of code that you may need to spend a lot of time to figure out. So for example, if you're gonna create a script with a macro recorder to format these labels in a particular way, it's gonna take you a long time to figure out what is that color or how to do those formattings and things like that. Instead, you could just record a macro. And absolute is gonna be fine for this all the time. So I'm just gonna highlight this, give it some styling. So make it centered, maybe change the background color, maybe change the text color, do some borders, something like that. So then I'm gonna stop this, save it, I'm gonna call it colors. And then edit. So this is just getting the sheet. And what we're really concerned about is, for example, how do you set alignment and make it centered? So that gives you that piece of code. It gives you the color of the background. I don't have to go and figure out what that color is because I can just grab that color right here. I can get the color for the font. I can have the border. See, that's the border, color of the border, and the style of the border. All of the code is right here, so you don't have to go and figure that out. So you can easily take that code and transform it into something that will get you nicely written code, and you can incorporate all those in your code. So let's do that. So if I do var ss, and I'll take my spreadsheet app, dot get active spreadsheet dot get active sheet. Now I'm gonna go inside of that spreadsheet, and what I want to get is the first row here, all the labels. So I'm gonna do get range, and I'm gonna use this. So the first cell is gonna be first row, the first column is gonna be the first column, the number of rows, so we start here 1 1, number of rows is 1, and number of columns, I assume it could be different because we might be adding more. So I can just, instead of just doing 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so just typing 8 here would work, but we want this to be dynamic, so we just do from that spreadsheet, we're gonna get last column, and that will be that 8. And then what do we want to do? That's gonna be the range. And if you look here, this is that line that get us the spreadsheet. I'm gonna delete that. This is where we get the range, and we activate that range. And activate means like this would be activate. So basically you just select it. Now, don't need that. Now then it take that active range, meaning whatever is selected, and do this. So I can just take this set horizontal alignment, and I could do this on this line, but you can also just put this on separate lines. That would work too. So that gets me the horizontal alignment for this range that I've highlighted, the background color, the font color, the border, and that ends here. Now, do I need this? No, I don't need to go and select another cell. If I save this, now I have a new colors macro, and this should achieve the same thing. So let's go test this out. Go back here and maybe go to this tab. See, we have more columns, more labels. That's perfect. Macros, colors. And it found out how many columns we have. It basically did all the colors, background, centering, and all that stuff. And our macro now is much better than the recorded macro because it's dynamic. We're actually dynamically figuring out how many columns it needs to go through to highlight it, while the original recorded macro would have just done that range only from here through here. A couple of other things I wanted to mention is that when you record a macro, the steps that you do and the way you select things make a difference. So what I mean by that, if I go here, you know what, actually to make this example easier to understand, I'm going to delete some of these rows. Okay, so I'm going to tools, macros, record a macro. Absolute references is fine for this. So when you're recording a macro, if you go here and highlight from here through here, and you give it this, or the other method would be to click here and press your Command Shift arrow key down or Control Shift arrow key down, and then go ahead and do your border. So two methods. One, I just went with my mouse and I highlighted that range. The second one, I clicked on the top and then I did Control Shift arrow key down and I highlighted that range. Now, or if I'm here, let's say, and Control down, that will send me down, and then I'm going to try to give this some background color, or I could click here and give this some background color. So let's save this and see what we get as a result. shortcut. Edit script. We get our active spreadsheet. We highlight that range. Remember, from B1 through B15. That was from here through here. And then we take that and set the border color to something, basically change the styling. And then let's see the second one. So what we do, we go to A1, and then we stay in the current cell. And then what we do, instead of, see, before we were just highlighting the set range, but here we're doing this Control-Shift down thing, which is that spreadsheet direction down. So we're activating it using that Control-Shift down, and then we take that activated area and then we set the styling. The second example, when I was doing this, is, see, we go to C1, which is our C1. Then we do this arrow down thing, which is our direction down, and we activate. And then we take that active, whatever is activated, and we set the background. Or we can just click on D15 and set the background. So what is the difference between these two? So to see the difference, well, first of all, let me just clear the formatting here and run that macro. So it did the things we expected, right? We said highlight this, give it some borders, then this, give it some borders, then this green, this green. Worked exactly the same, no difference. Now I'm gonna go ahead and remove the formatting again, but this time I'm going to delete some rows. So the row count is not the same this time. I'm gonna go under Tools, Macros, and Shortcuts. Now look what happened. This is going until the end of the data. This is going until the end of the data. This is doing exactly the same thing as it did before. So if you just highlight manually like this, it's gonna do the same area. But if you do Control-Shift down or Command-Shift down, depending on the platform you're on, what you are going to find out is that it's actually recording that action of Control-Shift down. Therefore, if your data is a different length, it will actually capture that change. So here too, see, Control down, I found the end, and then I colored it. Or you click here and you color it. But if you click here and next time your data is, let's say, more or less, then clicking here is not gonna find the last cell in your data. So if you want a more dynamic macro that will basically just format your data depending on the number of rows you have, you could record it in a different way. So you can just go here. Let's just record one, Tools, Macro, record macro, and absolute. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to format the labels. Now the labels are going to be always in the same spot, meaning I can just select my mouse, give them the colors, backgrounds, whatever they have to be. At this point, I want to format my numbers. So to format my numbers, I'm gonna click here and then do Control-Shift down or Command-Shift down, depending on the platform you're on. And then just decrease some decimal points. And then Control-Shift down again. And decrease some decimal points for this too. Then I want to highlight this whole thing and give it some borders. So I'm going to click in the cell, then Control-Shift right and down, and then go here and do some borders. Basically keep doing this Control-Shift down anytime you need to highlight the column or the row. Once you're done, it's probably a good practice to click back on A1 cell, and then we're going to save this macro. Better formatting. Hit save. So now because the way I recorded this, I should be able to make this work for any size of data. So if I clear this formatting and we just run that macro, better formatting, that works just fine. Now let's clear this again and maybe delete a few rows and then try this one more time. Better formatting, and it works again. So for basic things like this, you could just use the macro recorder, but if you want to do something more advanced, more logic in it, you're gonna have to use your script editor and you have to learn how to write some code. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.